Welcome back to Nate the Hate, where I am once again joined by Modern Vintage Gamer.
What's up, Nate? Great to be here.
It's always a pleasure to have you here, and today we have a treat for the listeners. We are going to talk about Nintendo's prospective 2020 holiday lineup due to the rumors or reports that came out this week about a 3D Mario collection, some sites were reporting, but it seems like Nintendo is going to bring three 3D Mario games to the Switch with the release of Mario 64, Mario Sunshine. Nobody nobody should ever acknowledge that game, and 2007's Super Mario Galaxy. Now, Venture Beat did report that it would also feature Super Mario Galaxy 2, but today Video Game Chronicle came out and in an article they claimed that it's just those previously three games of 64, Sunshine, and Galaxy. And we're still unsure of the exact format of how these will be released, whether it be collection, standalone, or, is always possibly looking at a Super Mario All-Stars version number 2, because we did get that on the Super NES, and it saw a re-release on the Wii to celebrate, I believe it was Mario's 25th anniversary, while this year is celebrating Mario's 35th anniversary. So, what was your take on these rumors and reports when they hit yesterday?
Well, initially I'll be honest with you, Nate, I was a little skeptical. We just came from out of the Direct last week, and all of a sudden we got this kind of news drop about this 35th anniversary Mario collection, we'll call it, that's supposedly being developed. But as soon as there was multiple sources reporting the same story and hearing things about this, that's enough for me to say this is legit. This is a legitimate thing that has been in development. We don't know how long it's been in development for, but this is something that is very, very exciting as someone personally who is a big Mario fan. And I will say that Super Mario 64 is one of my favorite games of all time, definitely in the top 5. I'm pretty excited to see what comes out of this. Now, look, I have questions about certain topics, and I'm sure we'll get through those in this discussion. But in general, yeah, I mean, I think this is more than just a rumor at this point. I think if VentureBeat and Gamatsu and Eurogamer and all these publications all basically say the same thing, then there is a legitimate thing going on here. This is real. Now, when we'll see it, we don't know. Will we see a direct that comes out that basically showcases this stuff before June? Or is it going to be the next kind of June direct that we're anticipating? When we'll see this stuff, we don't really know, and I guess we can talk about that. But yeah, I mean, other than that, I'm very excited to see what comes out of this. And I guess the other thing was the 3D World is kind of another game that's on that list too, right? That's going to be the deluxe version, whatever that means. Is it going to be like an extra part of this where you buy a deluxe pack and you get 3D World, or is 3D World going to be its own game that you buy? We're not really sure there as well. And then the Paper Mario discussion too, which kind of fits in this, but it also is its own thing, whether Paper Mario is a part of this as well. I guess it's going to be more of a standalone game that may or may not come out this year, but it might come out this year. So yeah, lots of questions, lots of excitement, and yesterday was just an absolutely crazy day with all these announcements.
Yeah, and it made it clear that Nintendo is definitely going to celebrate Mario's 35th anniversary in a substantial way, because if we really, we take these reports to heart, you take the trilogy of old 3D Mario games, we look at 3D World, then Paper Mario. I mean, that's 5 Mario games that we could see release this year. And I mean, that's a lot of Mario. And as you said, like Mario 64 is one of the best games of all time. I would also say Super Mario Galaxy 1 and 2, whether or not 2 is in this collection, but those two games are arguably 2 of the greatest games of all time in their own right. Sunshine exists, and
Man, you hate Sunshine, don't you? I don't like Sunshine either, but I think Sunshine is a great and this makes me sound like I hate it too, but Sunshine is a great tech demo of the GameCube.
It was like Sunshine, not to get into, off tangent over here, but Sunshine was that I was looking forward to Sunshine so much when I was younger. And I finally get the hands on the game, and it just didn't live up to my expectation in so many ways. The camera was so finicky. All the momentum Mario would have was just completely erased by Flood.
Yeah.
And just the look of the characters in the game, they never resonated with me. I do like some of the music in the game, like Delfino Plaza. I do like the water effects, the mirror effects, like some of the visual effects the game has on display are still amazing. It's just the game's core design just never clicked with me. And I have questions about how that game is going to translate to a Switch release, because it was the showcase of the analog triggers on the GameCube controller, and the Switch does not have analog triggers. And some may be wondering, how is that going to impact the game? And the analog triggers, because they were pressure sensitive, allowed you to do a little water squirt or do the full blast.
Yeah.
And because the Switch has digital triggers, it's 100% or nothing.
Right.
So, like, that's going to be a development obstacle for them to overcome in this release. And I mean, there are going to be ways they can, but like that's going to be something interesting to see how they tackle. And Sunshine, I'll give it a try.
Yeah.
If it comes out this year on the Switch, I'll try it. But as my good friend Andre put on Twitter yesterday, I can wait to play Sunshine on my Switch.
Right. I mean, I agree with you. If that collection includes those three games, Mario 64, Sunshine, and Galaxy, I mean, I'm going straight for Galaxy first, and Mario 64, then Sunshine is definitely third in that list. But I will say this: if they make it 60 frames per second, they really tighten up the controls and somehow figure out how to deal with the analog trigger issue, which, I mean, look, they may map it to the right stick, or, I mean, you can't rule this out, Nate. They may bring out another controller for this collection, which is kind of the preferred way to do it, if you think of it that way. I would definitely give it another go. If they increase the game and the performance of the game.
Yeah, because what's interesting, how you brought up 60 frames a second, is when we saw the debut trailer back at, I believe it was E3 2001, the trailer actually showed Mario Sunshine running at 60 frames a second, and then when it released the following year, it was 30 frames a second. And, you kind of wonder, why did Nintendo have to cut performance? Because it seemed like they were targeting 60 frames a second, at least in the early days of the release. So if they could potentially boost it to that original 60 frames target, maybe it could improve the game. I mean, ideally they do address the camera issues and such in this new release, because that would alleviate a lot of the problems aside from just core design flaws. But the camera was a finicky mess to fight with in a lot of stages. And even actually for the controls, like you brought up, maybe they release a new controller. I would imagine, kind of like Smash Brothers, that this would have GameCube adapter support.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it doesn't help us if we're playing it in handheld mode, but at least I would imagine the option would be there for docked play. And, at least, I guess, the purist and those who want to experience it in its original design format can do that with that. And, that's going to be something I'm really interested to see them address, is the controls. Are they going to improve those camera controls? And just, some of those minor nitpicks, like how much are we really looking at these releases? Because right now the reports are mixed. They're just calling them re-releases for an anniversary of Mario. And like we've seen Activision go back and do the original Crash trilogy. Mm-hmm. And those were remade from scratch, completely new modern visuals, improved controls. And you mentioned it earlier. How is Nintendo going to address these three games? Because like we've seen them do deluxe versions, as was reported with the 3D World, which VGC said will have new content and levels, but obviously like the visuals aren't going to be improved on that. So we see those deluxe versions, and we've also seen HD versions, like we saw at Twilight Princess HD and Wind Waker HD back on the Wii U, where Nintendo took a lot more time, especially with Wind Waker, to improve those visuals and the camera and the overall aesthetic of the game. Whereas Twilight Princess was, not to use the word lazy, but it was less ambitious
Right.
in its HD adaptation. So, what are you expecting Nintendo to do with these three releases?
Man, that's a great question. I've got some different thoughts about this, and maybe before I answer, let me throw this back to you for a second. I definitely want to answer your question, so I'm not like diverting or anything, but let's kind of take a step back. So we're potentially talking about 5 games, right? How and are all these games really going to release in 2020? We're talking about 5 games, Nate. Like 5 Mario games. Do we really think all these are going to drop in 2020? And before you answer that, does that mean we're talking about ports or remakes or remasters? I mean, I guess my question is the amount of effort that has to go into getting, we'll say, a collection plus potentially 2 other games coming out this year. It seems very, very ambitious to me. Very ambitious. So do you think Nintendo is really going to be able to pull off, 5 Mario games this year?
I'm gonna tackle this in a multi-layered way. If I do think we'll get all 5 of these games in 2021, I could see the Paper Mario release probably being more of like a summer game because Nintendo likes to release an RPG in July or August. So I could see Paper Mario filling that slot. And I mean, Paper Mario, for as great as it is, it's still a niche game. It doesn't cater to the large Mario audience that you see a 2D Mario or a 3D Mario really appeal to. So Paper Mario kind of exists in its own world. 3D World, because it was a Wii U game, it's a lot of people have played it. It was, I believe, the second best selling Wii U game. So a lot of people have played it. If it does have the new content and levels that VGC had reported, that might spark some interest from, some double dippers. But at the end of the day, 3D World was more of a multiplayer Mario game. Whereas the 3 games we're getting in this reported collection are single player, and I think we're going to see closer to upres from all 3 games than full on remakes or remasters. Because we've seen Mario Galaxy get that release in China on the, I believe it was NVIDIA Shield.
That is correct. That's a great point. I totally forgot about that, but you are correct. So we already know that it runs on very, very similar hardware, right? The Tegra X1.
Right.
Yeah. Good point.
So I could see Galaxy basically being very similar to what the Chinese release would have. And I think with Sunshine and Mario 64, maybe we get like a 1080p hub screen. So the health bar and stuff, that's up-res to a native 1080. And I mean, because it is cast played in docked mode and undocked mode, we're probably going to get 16 by 9 and widescreen support. Now, I'm not sure if Sunshine had widescreen support on the GameCube.
I think actually that's a good question. I know it had progressive scan. Actually, no, it didn't have that either, did it? It was one of those games that actually didn't, or maybe it did. My memory's a little fuzzy because I played it in PAL, so PAL never had true progressive scan, so I have to go back and look. But yeah, I'd be surprised if it had 16 by 9. But it may or may not have progressive. But either way, yeah, it definitely needs some cleaning up for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen numerous N64 games get those HD upres between. I mean, Night Dive Studios has been the primary provider of those games. They've done Turok, Doom 64, and I wouldn't call those games remakes in any way. They are HD'd N64 games, and they look really good. They're nice and clean. Those textures have, everything's been improved, and that's all I'm really expecting from like a Mario 64. And I think Sunshine will fall into the similar thing. We're just going to see some cleaner textures, but I don't think we're seeing a Twilight Princess or a Wind Waker HD full on remaster with any of these three games.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we're talking, there's two ways this can go. There's the emulation route and the ports. So let's assume that source code was not available, but I mean it is, but let's just assume there was no source code available. That would mean that Nintendo would need to build Nintendo 64 emulator to run Mario 64. They'd need to build a GameCube emulator to run GameCube, and they'd need to build Wii emulation to run Galaxy. Now, as someone who is aware of the homebrew scene, I can tell you that all three of those things are already up and running on the on the Switch in a homebrew capacity. So, putting together a collection of those three games could be done without any type of, we'll say, enhancements today, right? And that wouldn't take Nintendo very long. And this is where my brain starts to tick a little, because if you've got a Nintendo 64 emulator and a GameCube emulator, then what does that mean for the next level of, after the NES and Super NES Online? Does that mean we will start to get Nintendo 64 next year and possibly GameCube, middle of next year? So it opens the door for that side of the equation as well, that, we've got some emulation that's going on, so let's utilize that in the online service for the next level of games that we want to start bringing out next year. But there's also the flip side, which is what you're talking about, which is the porting side, where they have source code for Mario 64. It's out there. They have the source code for Galaxy, and they have the source code for Sunshine. So let's take that code and maybe do, I don't want to say just enough, because that makes it sound like they haven't really put much effort into it, but do enough to those ports to bring them up to 720p docked, undocked, and 1080p docked 60 frames per second. Add high-res textures to, say, Mario 64. Add widescreen support, like you said. Same thing with Sunshine and Galaxy. Add that to 1080p 60 frames, and all of a sudden you've got a very compelling collection that doesn't necessarily need that much development effort to bring those to where they need to be on the Switch. All of them are going to run at 60 without even batting an eyelid. They're all going to run very well, and essentially you kind of put extra artwork, and you put extras, and you put really cool little features on the cartridge, and you've got this amazing collection that you can potentially get out the door for, we'll say, holiday 2020. It does make sense either way you go on whatever they decide to do with this collection. But I have questions though about, well, what about everything else that supposedly is coming out this year? Are we basically saying, Nate, that this is now their focus, between now and the rest of the year, to get the Mario collection out and possibly a 3D World as kind of the big holiday game for this year? Which, if that happened, I'd be pretty happy with. I'd be very happy with if that's what happened. But are we saying that we've heard about Breath of the Wild 2, we've heard about other games? Are those things kind of being brushed aside and maybe being pushed a little towards sometime next year? What do you think about, I guess, the release cycle or the release schedule for the back half of 2020?
It does seem as though Nintendo is positioning their holiday 2020 lineup around Mario. And it does feel like these three Mario games for this collection would probably be a staple of that holiday release. Because, I mean, these are three iconic Mario games. They have value not just from a nostalgia standpoint, but even from the standpoint of there's a lot of lapsed Nintendo fans who have bought back into the Switch ecosystem, and maybe they didn't play Mario Galaxy because they didn't own a Wii, because they haven't owned a Nintendo system since the Nintendo 64. Or you even have people who never owned a Nintendo platform who now own a Switch, and maybe they remember Mario 64 as when they were kids and their friends had it, but they never played it, or even the same for Galaxy. And this is that type of release that has amazing sales potential if we're viewing it as a trilogy collection, as like a Mario All Stars type of release. And I do think if they do handle it in the porting way as we discussed, it makes sense as a trilogy release because that means, as you kind of touched on, it's not a simple effort, but it's not a high risk effort. And that lends itself to such a release because I don't see Nintendo going back to Mario 64 and doing a Final Fantasy 7 remake type thing, because then that would have been a standalone $60 release. And to do that for all three games would basically cannibalize
Yeah.
Nintendo's, own interest. You do a low risk investment with high risk or high return of interest at $60 for these three games, and Nintendo makes bank. And they just have unlimited sales potential. Is it necessarily an exciting holiday release? I'm not sure, but it's a safe one that will sell a lot. And I think this type of release does push Breath of the Wild 2 out of the holiday 2020 discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, Nintendo hasn't talked about Zelda since E3 last year. They gave us no indication at E3 last year that it would be a 2020 release. They just showed us a trailer and it said the Breath of the Wild sequel now in development. And like what we see with a lot of Zelda games is they get delayed.
Yeah.
I mean, Breath of the Wild was delayed, twice before it finally got a firm release date. And right now, I wouldn't bet the bank that Breath of the Wild 2 comes out this year. It's certainly possible, but at the same time, now in the back of my mind, because of all these Mario releases, I am consciously aware that next year is Zelda's 35th anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't it make more sense to Nintendo from a marketing standpoint to hold Breath of the Wild 2 until next year, even if it's for a spring release or early summer, and use that to leverage a potential big year for Zelda as, similar to what they're doing this year for Mario. And we also have to look at the current events of the world and how they are impacting development. And Breath of the Wild 2 has definitely fallen victim to that, whether it is from localization at Nintendo of America or just development of its own in Japan. The game has hit at least 2 to 3 months of development halt. And I'm sure it was penciled in for 2020 at some point at Nintendo's headquarters. And I would fully anticipate that's been erased and a tentative 2021 release has replaced it. And I think these 5 Mario games are one hell of a replacement. And this is enough to move hardware.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to move substantial software from these releases. And if I was Nintendo, I'd still feel confident rolling into this holiday going up against the PS5 and the Series X with Mario 64 and Mario Galaxy. I mean, they are 2 iconic games. They are games that other 3D platformers still look to for inspiration and for design ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think everything you said is on the money. I do think that, you use the word safe, and I think that really is the approach that Nintendo's taking this year with this. I think this will definitely sell a lot of units, no doubt about that. Potentially there'll be a special edition console or a limited edition console or handheld that comes alongside of it. And I think, it's the right move for them, especially considering the uncertainty that we're dealing with this year. Having this type of collection coming out, it's almost a no-brainer, that they do this. It means that there is little to no risk at all of them not selling units and selling a lot of millions and millions of copies of this game. And I think, it's the right move for them, and they can absolutely do it. The Switch is more than capable of playing these games and playing them very well. And I would agree. I think Breath of the Wild 2 was never something that was really confirmed or even, teased that it was coming out this year. We just made the assumption that, it was based on what we saw last year. But I think you're right. I mean, I think these three games will be a big ticket item. And let's not forget, 3D World Deluxe or Super Mario 3D World, as well as kind of the fourth game in that list, which, by the way, is one of my favorite Mario games. It's definitely up there as one of the better ones for me that I really enjoyed. And that's one that has been thrown around a few times as one of the Wii U ports that never got a port. We've been talking about 3D World since last year as one that, there've been rumblings about. So that could potentially be one that is, I don't want to say dev complete, but it's maybe a lot further along than the collection is. So, that potentially could have been one of those games that was always on the cards to come out, this year anyway. So I would expect 3D World to be one of those games that is, almost done as far as development. Now they're just adding the enhancements and they're ready to start thinking about the QA process and everything like that. But it's just hard to know when these games are going to drop. And I guess the question I have for you, Nate, is who's going to develop all these? Which studios do you think? We know Nintendo's working on these, but is Grezzo going to handle one of these, or are they just going to handle all these internally? Do they have the manpower, especially considering that everyone's working remote right now? It's a lot. It seems like a lot on paper, a lot of work in very little time. And it just makes me wonder, have these things been on the cards for a while now? But yeah, do you have any idea about who's going to work on these games from Nintendo?
If I had to guess, I would imagine at least for Mario 64, I would guess it is probably Nintendo's Nerd division, who have previously done the emulation of the N64 and Super NES games for the Wii and Wii U Virtual Console. So I would imagine it's them. As for things like Galaxy and Sunshine, I don't recall from memory who handled the NVIDIA version of Galaxy. Mm-hmm. I don't know who did that release. I could see whoever did those handling Sunshine and Galaxy for the Switch release, but I think Nintendo would definitely hand it to someone internal like Nerd to handle such a release. I don't see them outsourcing it to any company I believe it was Tantalus who did Twilight Princess HD. I don't think they would contract a company like that because, Nintendo is still quite secretive and protective of their properties. And, Nerd has proven their emulation skill set several times now, and I believe they're still doing the Nintendo Switch Online games for the NES and Super NES games. So that's kind of it. That's their specialty. And they've already have somewhat of a mastery of N64 emulation. So I would imagine they would be the ones handling at least Mario 64 and Sunshine and Galaxy. I would assume whoever handled the NVIDIA Galaxy release.
Mm-hmm. If source code is available, which I can only assume it is for all of these games, then it's something that can be done pretty easily. And I think, I just wonder, is there too much here, for them to potentially deliver, for the holiday? But on paper, it's 5 games, and we think, well, 5 games, that's a lot. But you're right. It's not something that is insurmountable, when you really think about it. Emulation is very good on all these environments for GameCube, Nintendo 64, and the Wii. So it makes sense that can be done as well if emulation is the option that's taken. I guess I'm just not really sure which way they're going to go. But I would probably say the port way is the way that's preferred, and I think ideally that's what they'll do. But they could just break out emulation and just slap all 3 of those games and put them in a collection and just bump the emulation resolution up to 1080p 60 frames and say, here you go, guys. It's still going to look better. Still going to look better than what it did look like. Like I think
Yeah.
about like Onimusha, that came out on the Switch. Even though it was kind of up-resed, it still had those kind of blurry textures and stuff. I mean, they could definitely take that approach and make it widescreen. It really just depends on how much effort is put into these ports, and you know,
Yeah, I mean, when we see Nintendo do these type of collections, their effort it varies. We've seen like the Kirby Anniversary Collection where we had NES, I believe it even had some NES and N64 games, and it was a solid collection. But then we get the Mario All Stars collection on the Wii, and it was literally just the Super NES game as a ROM dump
yep,
with no changes whatsoever, and it disappointed a lot of people. I love Mario All Stars Collection on the Super NES because to me it has the definitive edition of Super Mario Brothers 3, and I mean that was kind of like the original remake or remaster when you really come down to think about it. So even though we're getting a lot of these HD remakes in the modern gaming industry, Nintendo kind of did it first, way back on the Super NES. But here's a question. We kind of touched on it with Mario Sunshine, but all three of these old 3D Mario games present some sort of control problem, I guess you would say, bringing it to a modern platform.
yeah,
Because Mario 64, not so much. It's still a pretty standard 3D platformer. Sunshine, we have the analog trigger that could pose a problem. And with Mario Galaxy, we have we don't have any pointer controls because
right.
Galaxy was made with the pointer of the Wiimote in mind. And now without analog and without pointer controls, they have some development obstacles to overcome in bringing these to, a platform like the Switch, which does not have those features. How do you think they can address this?
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know is the answer. I think they've got some challenges ahead of them. Definitely, the Mario Sunshine approach, like you said, they could have an adapter where you can plug in a GameCube controller. I think that will be available, but let's assume they don't. Let's assume you're playing this in handheld mode. I mean, the only option I can see, Nate, is they have to use the right analog stick, which doesn't feel it doesn't sound very comfortable to me. Like it makes sense, but Nintendo's, I mean, I think they'll come up with something. Maybe they'll kind of use the triggers like you did in Sunshine, but somehow add some type of analog component to it. I don't know how they could do that, but maybe there's a way.
I've thought about it, and like I guess technically the Switch does have more buttons than
Right.
the GameCube controller did. And this is the only options I can really fathom is you would have to use either the right analog stick, and I can press that down as a button press, and maybe I get 50% of the water, and I can use the L1 or R1 buttons as like a 25, a 75%, and then
Yeah.
like the left analog, I press that down for 100%. But that's convoluted.
Yeah, it
Like
is.
that's not simple. That's actually as I say it out loud, that sounds cumbersome. That
Yeah.
I don't want to play that at all, especially if the controls and the camera are still finicky. Then I'm fighting my Switch controls to sit to saying, oh, I want to go from 25 to 50%. Like, oh, nope, I fell.
What if they do right trigger, so right trigger is 25, and then right analog is another 25, and then the left the right shoulder is 25, the right trigger is 25, and then the left trigger is like, I don't know, 50. You know what I'm saying? Like you kind of hold
Yeah.
down the combination of those four buttons to kind of max out to 100, but even that just seems really kind of finicky, doesn't it? Like,
Yeah, it doesn't sound friendly.
yeah, it doesn't at all. Or maybe, yeah, I don't know. That's a tough one. That's a tough one to answer. And Galaxy as well. I mean, I guess you could take the. I mean, you can point a Joy-Con at a screen, can't you, and get some type of response. So maybe you could do that. But Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some challenges there that I think will be very interesting to see how they approach them for sure.
Yeah, like I figure maybe gyro can be used in Galaxy to move a cursor around. And I guess in the Chinese release, you just use the right analog stick to move it.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yep.
I mean, it would work, but I mean, when you played it on the Wii, just because of that intuitive control style to play Galaxy on the Wii, it was just so simple and smooth, and like it became second nature to do all those type of motions. And now now you can actually think to make those moves.
Yeah.
It's not going to be as seamless and smooth, and it's definitely. I'm curious to see how it will impact my enjoyment of the game because it's a brilliant game, but it was also brilliant because of those fluid controls. And now, we don't have that exact control style available to us. We're going to have to,
Yep.
we're going to have to change to this more modern control. And I mean, I have faith that Nintendo can do it because I don't think they would have chosen Sunshine and Galaxy if they weren't confident that they could overcome these control obstacles.
Yeah, definitely.
So
Definitely.
it's definitely I'm looking forward to when they actually unveil a trailer and say, "Here's the new control method," and be like, "Okay," because we've seen other games. Like I'll use Resident Evil Remake when it came to the PS4 and Xbox One. They kept in the tank controls and they also added a more friendly or more modern analog controls. And even though the analog controls, they were better for controlling the character, it also broke the game because you could easily evade the zombies.
Yeah.
And yeah, it made it friendlier, it made it more modern, but it also damaged the means in which you experience the game. And Nintendo, typically when they do a type of release like this, they still try to remain as authentic to the original experience as possible. And they certainly have a challenge out for themselves here.
One thing that I've learned about like emulation and stuff is, I've used emulators for many different systems over the years, and the controls have to be on point. If the emulation of a game could be perfect or even better than perfect, what I mean by that is, it runs at better frame rates, textures have been up-resed, everything looks, super smooth. But if your control scheme just doesn't feel good, it's not something I'm interested in, and Nintendo has to nail those controls. And I think you're right. I mean, I think the fact that they've penciled those games in to come out means that they're pretty confident that they can. But man, they've got some work ahead of them to get that control down correctly. Otherwise, it's going to be a nice collection on the shelf that not many people are going to play. They're going to go back to the originals, and that's unfortunate to say that, but they have to nail those controls. Otherwise, it's going to be a missed opportunity. And I think they will, but I also don't know how they're going to solve some of these things.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, because we've seen some other quality remasters or re-releases, and even like Crash Bandicoot in the last couple of years. Muscle memory with video games it's a weird thing. You can pick up a game and just exactly the physics, the momentum a character is going to have, and when you change that in a new modern release, whether it's emulated, a port, an HD remaster, when that's changed, you feel that it's off. You can tell like this has a hundredth of a second of input lag now that the original didn't have. And that will resonate with old school players. Like we'll pick up on that otherwise imperceivable amount of time immediately when we play something like Mario 64. Like that roll momentum isn't right. He should have rolled half a frame more.
Right.
And then
I feel like Super Mario on the DS 64, which
Yes.
is a great port, but I can't get my head around the controls in that game. And in the end, I just don't bother with it. I just go back to the N64 version. I know some people love that version of the game. I personally think the controls aren't very good because I'm used to, like you said, a certain way, and it doesn't translate well for me.
Since you brought up Mario 64 DS, could you see them in some weird Nintendo way use that version for this release, due to the more modern looking character models and some of those extra features they incorporated in that release.
I do. I do. That's a great point. They could easily use that as I'll say the baseline for what we're going to see with this port. Absolutely. I mean, that makes a lot of sense that they would turn to that version of the game. Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that. I mean, you got to remember the original Mario 64 is a very old game, which doesn't necessarily, there's some things about it that haven't really come across particularly well in 2020. So yeah, I mean, I could see them absolutely using the DS version as the starting point for this, for sure.
I could see that upsetting some people if they did go that route, though.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, but you got to remember, what's the goal here? Is it to try to, get the old fans like us, excited about Mario? Is it for new fans of the game, or is it a combination of both? I mean, who is kind of the big target demographic here? I mean, I would say it's going to be Switch fans that love Mario, that loved Mario Odyssey, and they want to play more Mario on their Switch. And some of these folks may have not played some of these games from the old days that will appear on this collection. So I think nothing is off the table as far as that's concerned. They may turn to the DS version of Mario 64.
Yeah, I could definitely seeing that being a point of contention among people, especially if Nintendo just advertises it as oh, it's Mario 64 HD, and then you see that DS model of Mario sitting there. I could see people definitely not being happy and arguing like this is not the authentic Mario 64 experience. It was an exciting port back in, geez, what was that, 2004?
It's been a while.
2000, yeah.
I think it was 2004. Yeah.
So man, we're talking about 15 plus years ago, and to see Mario 64 on a handheld at the time was wow. And at the same time, this was a Nintendo who took a game that relied on the analog stick and revolutionized 3D gaming and put it on a handheld that didn't have an analog stick.
Yeah.
A decision that continues to baffle folks even to this day, especially since their solution at the time was a thumb nub that you would rub on the touchscreen to somehow replicate analog movement. And that's a video for a different day because it still baffles the mind of how that was really what Nintendo did there. And hopefully we don't get some weird half-baked control solution for Galaxy or Sunshine with this collection where, you have to have a GameCube controller plugged in to use the nozzle while playing it on your Switch. Like, hopefully Nintendo did figure it out this time.
If they somehow make all three of these games and 3D World Deluxe control and feel like Super Mario Odyssey does, they're in good shape. If that's the target, then I think they'll be okay. But I do have a question for you, Nate, and this is important. So when do you think they're going to announce this stuff? Because is this going to be... Because we heard some rumblings about this was going to be the E3 showcase that they were going to show at E3 this year. Do you think that this stuff will be announced, we'll say E3 week in June, or do you think this is something that comes earlier or potentially comes later in the year?
I think based on that report that said it was supposed to be one of their big celebrations for E3, I think right now, given the situation, especially now with it being reported, if I were Nintendo, they've had substantial time since E3 has been canceled. It's been about a month now. I would have reevaluated and I would have pushed up the announcement to either coincide with the May 7th investors briefing to say, hey, we've been silent for a long time, guys, but look what we have planned for this year. We're going to celebrate Mario's anniversary. Investors will get excited for news like that. So I think given the scope of the situation, they would announce it sooner than later. And I would say at least I would expect something to be announced by May 7th.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's reasonable to assume we'll hear about that. But then, and this is maybe part two of a discussion next week. But what do they announce at E3 week, if there indeed is an E3 week direct that comes?
If there is an E3 week, I would imagine even they would still highlight the games there because I could see them just announcing intents to celebrate the 35th anniversary, but not necessarily detail all of the games or show them in full. And I would think you would probably then you could do that at E3 week for their inevitable June direct. But even with Breath of the Wild 2 probably, unlikely to release in 2020, I could see them still have that as a focus of their E3 show, especially if the game is penned in for an early 2021 release. As in, for early 2020, I just mean first half. So anytime before E3 2021.
Right.
So you still want to have that big spectacle of a focus there. Then if they have their Treehouse Live or some type of stream, you show the Mario games, some Breath of the Wild 2. So yeah, I would envision something like that for a June Direct where they can still focus on E3 or whatever, whatever they want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
They can have Mario, they can have Zelda, they can have the Paper Mario, 3D World, maybe Pikmin 3 finally shows up after a year of rumors.
Yeah.
All that stuff. So I think they could still focus on what they wanted to, and they just get rid of that party because it seemed like from the report, the celebration for the anniversary was really going to be something where they're going to have the industry attend, and it was really going to be kind of like a party for everyone there. And now, well, you're not going to have the party, but you can still have, you can still show the clip show and enjoy a nice film of what's to come.
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking forward to it. I think the announcement, for me at least, was something that I just didn't expect. Emily Rogers did kind of hint a couple of weeks ago that it's a good year to be a plumber this year, but that could be interpreted many different ways. I mean, I kind of initially thought about that as maybe there's a new Mario Odyssey game that's in the works that we'll see, but I think, yeah, man, it's definitely an exciting announcement. I do think that, there are some questions about how the game's going to control. Are they going to be ports or emulated? But I think it's going to be very, very exciting for the fans, and I'm very psyched to see what they come up with. I mean, I've always wanted, older games to come on the Switch that I really liked back in the day, Mario 64 and Galaxy, and I'm not sure about Galaxy 2, but I'm sure, if Galaxy does come on this collection, then I would say Galaxy 2 isn't far away either, whether that is in another collection or they decide to bundle Galaxy 1 and 2 together in its own collection. I'm not sure, but either way, I'm pretty psyched to see what they come out with this year.
Yeah, this is definitely an exciting collection for the Switch to get. I mean, these are three of the best Mario games, except for Sunshine, to come to the platform. And I mean, they really do have unlimited sales potential. They are iconic. And yeah, it's a bit safe, but it's going to be a big seller this holiday. They make a Mario 35th anniversary Switch and Switch Lite, and people are going to gobble those up. So it's definitely a strong holiday release. Then you have the Paper Mario. Can come out anytime between, I guess May and the end of the year. So when that hits, that should excite some fans because that series really hasn't had a good entry since the GameCube game, Paper Mario Thousand Year Door.
I'm not a big Paper Mario fan. I'm probably going to get some comments, but no, it was never really my thing. I mean, I get it. It's cool, but not my style of game at all.
Yeah, to me, I played it on 64, GameCube, and the Wii. And like the 64 game, it was fun. The GameCube one had great writing, had a great battle system. Super Paper Mario on the Wii was a good idea done poorly. I didn't even play Color Splash on the Wii U because it just didn't click with me. I played Sticker Star on the 3DS and I did not enjoy it. I see what it's going after, but I'm kind of at that point where if you're going to make a Mario RPG, make Mario RPG.
Yep.
Get Square Enix on board and get Geno so all the people can stop begging for him in Smash and make Super Mario RPG again and just go the full 10 yards. But I don't see Nintendo doing that anytime soon.
Definitely. Definitely.
So, yeah, so to conclude this, what would you say is your sales? What do you view the sales potential of this collection, if it is a collection? And in any way, do you see it possible that they could actually be three individual full-priced releases?
I think this will be a collection. We've heard the rumblings about Super Mario All Stars 2, which, if that's the case, that's a very clever name to give this collection and a very clever marketing term, because again, that's something that was something that Nintendo brought out back in the Super NES days that was just unheard of. I mean, if you want to talk about some of the pioneers of these collections of great games all in one, Nintendo was one of the first to actually do that with the Super Mario All Stars. So I think it will be a collection. I think those three games will make up the collection. And yeah, I mean, as far as sales, it's going to sell. Oh my God, I have no idea, what to predict. I mean, could easily be 10 plus million, all said and done with this stuff. But again, it just goes back to how they market this, as whether they try to make it appeal to, fans of Super Mario Odyssey. But I mean, everyone's a Mario fan, right? I mean, you bought a Switch because you like Nintendo and you like Mario and you want to play Mario games. So, I mean, whatever Mario Odyssey is sold, I would say this is going to be about the same. Honestly, I think it's going to sell a lot of units this year for sure. I'm interested in your thoughts on this too.
Yeah, I definitely view it as a collection. If Nintendo were just chasing money and they were willing to invest a lot of money into the ports themselves or the releases themselves, then I would have seen them as like a remake, them charging $60 for each individual. But I think it's smarter marketing for them to bundle them as a pack of three, branded Super Mario All Stars 2, because the All Stars name, as you have, it has that nostalgia value. We grew up, we remember Mario All Stars coming to the Super NES. Some will remember it coming to the Wii a decade ago. And that just has so much joy and love to that name. It's like, oh, it's Super Mario All Stars. These are the best of the best. And I mean, Mario 64 Galaxy again, best of the best of the 3D Mario games. So sales potential, it's the sky's the limit. This is going to be a game that sells the entire duration of the Switch's life. I could see it moving like at least 10 million units this holiday, and it's just going to sell and sell, especially if the release is quality. And I mean, it's definitely a reason I'm looking forward to. It's something, if it's coming out this holiday, I have to get ready to drop $60 on it, because I need my Super Mario Galaxy fix. I need my Mario 64 fix, especially having Super Mario Galaxy on the go. That's one of those mind-blowing releases to me.
Definitely.
So that is what we have for you today on Nate the Hate. I want to thank MVG for joining me as always.
Thanks for having me on, man. Always fun to hang out.
And you can find a link to his channel in the video description below. And for those who listen on iTunes or Spotify, should have opened with this, but if you listen this far through, you'll find out. We are now on iTunes and Spotify. You can find links to those in the description below as well. Let us know your thoughts on Mario potentially headlining Nintendo's 2020 holiday. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like. If you didn't, give it a dislike. And until next time, continue to embrace the hate.